Hello, everybody. It's Cale here at the Underneath. Welcome to the show. I am really excited to bring on my guest in just a second, but just a real quick, housekeeping thing here. Here at the Underneath, we pay attention to what we see and to what we hear and to what is going on just above or just below or what's going on just outside the frame to the left or to the right. And I want to see if we can help each other see in the midst of the storm. The general tempest of culture and politics and society and all that. So today, I'm really excited to bring on to you an old friend of mine from the General Eclectic days, Rod Dreher. Rod, how you doing, brother?
Hey, Cale, I'm doing well. And I got to ask you,
Yeah,
our birthday, we share a birthday, February 14th, right? It's
coming
coming
up. It's
up.
coming up. It's coming up.
Have you thought about what you're going to get me for my birthday?
Uh, no, I have not thought at all about what to get
You
you.
should,
Although
brother.
you know what I'm going to get you. I'm going to Venmo you right now. I'm going to Venmo you some money to go to your barber. That's what I'm going to do, brother.
Yeah,
You are
man,
looking floppy over there,
it's
son.
crazy. Normally my hair is, but
Yeah.
I haven't been to the barber in a while, and I'm starting to feel kind of Sean Cassidy. You know, the Gen X
Okay.
listeners will understand,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
the kids won't.
No, not so much. Not so much. Well, look,
Mm.
I'm really thrilled to have you on. You're in Buda. I'm here in Rhode Island, but I wanted to bring you on. I mean, look, we're about, I don't know, we're just a short time in to this Trump 2.0, and I got to tell
So much
you,
winning, so much winning.
well, what's wild, my Rod, again, and what we're about to say right now, you don't have to be a fan or not. Like this is honestly, this is just simply an observation. In our lifetimes, we have not seen something like this.
No, no. I mean, here's the crazy thing, Gail, that I've been
Yeah,
thinking about. I mean, you know where I stand politically. I think
yeah.
it's fantastic all the things he's doing. But there's a part of me wondering if the entire American system is such that any president can just dismantle
Yeah.
entire agencies by executive order. That's pretty scary.
Well, yeah, of course, and and again, that was you anticipated my caveat, right? Which is as exciting as it is to sort of see an executive execute. I mean, to see an executive as an executive, as opposed to
Right.
some sort of consortium of sort of sub personalities and assistants and secretaries and whatnot. It's remarkable, full stop. But yeah, like I'm uh, taken aback by the sort of the power of executive orders. And I wonder, we have talked in years past, we have talked about the kind of the sclerosis of the American order that, that all of the three branches of government have in some senses forfeited and ceded their own responsibilities and their own areas of constitutional functionality, that maybe this is sort of where we have arrived. I mean, I remember specifically talking with you about Obama's quip that he has a phone and he has a pen
Hmm.
as a way of kind of circumventing the legislative process. But so I will grant you that. But what is very clear is that there is another perhaps more potent government than what is on the page from a
Yep.
legislative, judicial and executive branch. Clearly, for all the stuff that we've yammered on about over the years, Rod, about the administrative state, clearly this is what we are watching unfold in front of us is a kind of pulling back the veil, I think, right, of this
It,
administrative state. So what do you make of this?
well, it's an apocalypse in two
Yeah,
senses.
yeah,
One in the pop culture sense of being complete destruction,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Of the blob, the administrative
yeah.
state, all of that, but also in the strict etymological sense of an unveiling.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I know a lot about stuff that goes on with the deep state, but I got to tell you, I've been blown away by all the revelations from USAID, the stuff they were doing. Like I'd written in the past about how they in 2015 they partnered with George Soros's Open Society Foundation to translate, publish, and distribute Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals in the Republic of Macedonia to help seed a color revolution to overthrow the conservative government there. And, so I know they do that, but I had no idea it was as extensive as Elon Musk's team is showing now. And crazy things like $70,000 of taxpayer money to pay for a DEI musical in Ireland. What if you're sitting there in Western North Carolina, you haven't had a house since a hurricane, and you read stuff like that? I mean, I think that kind of thing is why there has been no outrage among the American people by Trump going in and ripping things up. And I think, honestly, I can't imagine any other political figure in America who would have had the nerve to do what he has done. Remember, Cale, the Republicans have been in power in the executive and in
Right.
Congress for so long. They hadn't done any of this.
Like nothing, man. Like nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, dead. And there's Trump doing all this stuff, shutting down USAID. And I hope that the worthy things they fund, like building hospitals for poor people, stuff like that, I hope that gets restored. And I expect it will be. But stuff like, transgender films in Colombia, crap like that, get rid of it and don't even apologize.
Well, I seem to recall a very funny quip of yours several years back about queering the Donbass, and I
Yeah.
wonder if embedded in that joke is a much larger reality than even I think you presumed when you
Yeah.
jotted that down. I mean, right? What are you making
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, well, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State under
Mhm,
Obama,
mhm.
she announced, I think it was 2010, that henceforth LGBT rights would be a major focus of American foreign policy.
Mhm.
And boy, did they make good on that. I mean, everywhere you go in this USAID stuff, they're finding out, our government went into conservative countries, especially in Africa, spending all this money to promote LGBT. A
Right.
guy wrote to me, one of my readers on my Substack, said that they had recently at his church, I think it was in Texas, a pastor of one of the largest Protestant churches in Chile.
Right.
And he said that, Chile is a fairly conservative country, but they do have a number of liberals here. But that US development money was not going to come to them unless they changed the laws on LGBT. And this is how America has been behaving all around the world. And the media don't care about it because they completely agree with it, right?
Well, they like it. It aligns with either their primary concerns or their obvious concerns, right? I've developed this little trick in my head lately of anytime I hear a talking head or a journalist or whatever use the word obvious or obviously or imply the word obvious or obviously, look there
Yeah,
because something is being smuggled in under that phrase obvious. And
sure, sure.
I am blown away with the sort of the potential scope of all of that. You have mentioned over the past couple of years since you've been in Budapest the striking difference of seeing your own country from outside, but
That's right.
also one of the things that I've picked up from you, Rod, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about this to my audience, what other people think about the United States of America is also bottlenecked and constricted through very specific information spigots.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Just the other day, you were talking about a friend, a guy you met, and you said, I think you quipped, "Oh, you must read The Guardian." And I wonder if you could sort of
Right.
unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I tell you, it's I've been living here in Budapest for the last 3 years, and I'm online all the time. I work online, and so I
Mhm.
read the American media constantly. And to see the difference between actual existing Hungary and the
Yeah,
way it's portrayed in the American media is just shocking.
yeah,
I mean, this is an authoritarian fascist hellhole, and actually, it's a pretty great place.
yeah.
You see so many more cops on the street in the United States than here because it's an orderly society.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons it's so orderly is they don't have mass migration.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there is that people in America don't even care about Hungary. Why should they? It's a country of 10 million people.
Yeah.
But if they do, even conservatives will say to me, well, it must be pretty bad over there. No.
No. Yeah.
But as you
Yeah.
said, though, I was in Oxford last week at a dinner, and I was sitting next to a guy who was just an Anglican clergyman. He was just raging about Trump and all that.
Yeah.
And I listened
Yeah.
to him. You know, he's a liberal. I don't. That's fine. He's entitled to his opinion. But he kept getting a lot of facts wrong.
Yeah.
And I would challenge him and said, "Well, did you realize blah blah blah?" Well, no. And I just kept going on and on. Like when I brought up the fact that so many minorities, you know, Latinos and Black folks, voted for Trump, and more than have voted for any Republican ever. He didn't know this. That's when I said to him, "You must get all your news from the Guardian." He said, "It's a fine newspaper."
Yeah.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
but your idea of what's happening in America is entirely dependent on people who hate it or who hate what's happening. And you know,
right. In other words, just to sorry to interrupt. In other words, the perspective or the frame by which you're receiving your information passes itself off as a kind of neutral, grand sort of august perch with which to watch the truth unfold, when in actuality this is a sort of mangled and wrestled and wrought pseudo reality.
Yeah, I was telling the guy, I said, look, you don't have to like Trump,
Yeah,
but you
right.
at least should know why he got elected. And it's not because there was some sort of grand deception and all that, that people were really fed up with conditions there. But, you know, I was thinking today, Cale, I saw an old clip of Catherine Maher, who is the CEO of NPR, National Public Radio. And she said, talking about journalism, she said that she thinks that truth, our concern for the truth, is getting in the way of finding consensus. I mean, I'm speechless.
Yeah,
because you're the head of a major news outlet, and you believe you're stating it flat out that truth gets in the way of constructing the narrative, and therefore truth has to go. You know, I'm so glad that even though Trump and his team, Elon and the others, are going in there, you know, with an axe and just swinging willy nilly, I'm glad of it. You know, and I hope that they go after NPR too.
Yeah. So I wanted to drill down a little bit with this USAID, which is the the Agency for International Development. I think that's a good word, development, right? Development for what? You know, is the question that's buried under that. But it's a great title. It's a great name. It sounds wonderful. It sounds amazing. And so today, Rod, I did a little bit of just a quick little sleuth job, and I said, well, when was the USAID established? And as it turns out, the USAID was established in the fall of 1961, and under the forget the name of the act. It was sort of the sort of Development Act, Kennedy, right? And of course, if you recall, something happened in April of 1961, which was a little bit of a fiasco, if you know what I'm saying, right?
Bay of Pigs?
The Bay of Pigs. That's exactly right. So in April of 1961, we have the debacle of the Bay of Pigs. And as is, I think, fairly well known and unarguable, is that this was essentially a kind of botched project of the CIA. In some capacity, and there was some kind of fight or squabble between Kennedy and the CIA and all the powers that be. And at any rate, it's a big mess, right? And I can't help but wonder, or maybe connect the dot there, that the CIA, sort of the last, well, I shouldn't say the last because it's never the last, right? But my sense is that in the wake of the Bay of Pigs, they had to change the way they went about their business, right? And so one of the guys that I follow on the Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is Mike Benz. And Mike Benz has been doing some great work uncovering the fact that the USAID is, in fact, a front organization for the CIA, and a way of essentially laundering semi-off-the-books activities around the globe. And I wonder, and he himself has said that this is not a controversial point, and that he didn't really raise any eyebrows about the work about the USAID until they started turning their focus in-house, that is, domestically.
Oh yeah,
Right.
on Americans.
That's right. And as our audience, I'm sure, knows, that on paper, the CIA is an organization outwardly facing, and the FBI is the organization that is inwardly facing, as far as police, law enforcement.
Yeah.
Right. But it would appear that the CIA is still doing the things that the CIA does. And if so, if the USAID is in fact used in part, and maybe in a big way, for um, international intrigue, uh, do you think that this will spark? I just can't believe that the people who are sort of running this deep state blob thing are just going to be
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, Elon showed up. I guess, oh shucks, I guess we're just going to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to fold up shop. I mean, what do you have any sense of this?
Well, I mean, look, I saw today just before we came on that Trump has offered every employee of the CIA a buyout.
Wow,
So he wants to
wow,
clean that place out too. I mean, I, I think it's ordinary for any country to be, especially a rich one like the United States, to be engaged in these soft diplomacy,
sure,
these softer
sure,
methods to advance our interests. My concern is that it ain't our interest. Like I was in Slovakia last year, right after the election. Trump had won, and I talked to the Slovak conservative. It's a pretty Catholic country, right?
yeah,
And he said, "Boy, I hope your new president will crack down on the NGOs because your country funds so many progressive NGOs in this country that's fighting against the Catholic Church, it's fighting against anything conservative, and it's a small country, so they know." And now Trump has done that here in Hungary. Samantha Power, who was head of the USAID under Biden, came here 2023, delivered $20 million, which goes a long way in a small country like this,
yeah,
to local groups that are, quote, pro-transparency and pro-democratic,
mm,
i.e., they oppose the Orban
yeah,
government.
yeah. Those are
Now,
buzzwords, right? Those are buzzwords, right, Rod?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's just it's remarkable because the narrative in America is that, oh, Viktor Orban controls all the media in Hungary. The biggest broadcaster in this country is owned by the Germans, and it's against the government. There is all kinds of opposition media. Now, it is true the government controls certain channels, and I mean, I don't speak Hungarian, so I don't know what they say.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But guess what? Every country in Europe is like that.
Right, right.
But USAID was targeting this government because the Orban government is not pro LGBT. It was not on board with the Ukraine war, things like that. And but it sounds good to the American people when they hear that, oh, the US government is paying for pro-democracy stuff,
Right. I
right?
mean, just that phrase, pro-democracy. I mean, Rod, who could be against pro-democracy
Right,
movements? I mean,
right,
come
right.
on,
And now
buddy.
they're saying that, oh, all the autocrats will be delighted. Well, in Macedonia, when I was telling you about it,
Yeah.
turns out I went back today and dug more in that.
Uh-huh.
They sent like $5 million laundered through George Soros and the Open Society Foundation to build democracy in Macedonia, which means open the doors for mass migration, which means, privilege, LGBT stuff, and on and on and on. It is
Yeah.
the agenda. But if they sell it as promoting democracy, nobody's going to care. Nobody
Right.
back home is going to care until Donald Trump gets there. And I mean, it's just breathtaking. I never thought we would see this happen in our lifetime, but he's making it happen, and it makes it easy for me to forgive him when he does things I think are crazy, like saying, "Oh, America's going to take over Gaza and build a big, beautiful resort there."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That ain't going to happen. But
No, no, of course not.
oh,
Yeah,
That Mike Bensing, by the way, are you
yeah.
talking about the Joe Rogan interview he did where
Well,
he,
yeah, but I follow him on
yeah,
X, and
man,
he has some great stuff. I mean, the guy is really extremely knowledgeable. I really think,
former State Department.
yeah,
Yeah.
you should reach out to him, right? You should have a conversation with him.
Wow,
I think,
that Rogan interview, I was riveted. A lot of
yeah,
times I can't watch all of
yeah,
Rogan
yeah,
because
yeah,
of
yeah. No, I
hours,
know.
but this, and he was talking about, he has a clip in there where he talks about how the Atlantic Council, another one of these groups in Washington, was training journalists to fight disinformation.
Right,
Okay. What that is, though, is any information that goes against what the blob wants you to believe. That's disinformation. It's a lie. It's all about managing the narrative. And I got to tell you, here in Europe, these people at the EU and Brussels and all that, they are messing their pants right now because so much of the money that their friendly NGOs, narrative managing NGOs, have been getting, it's gone. And once people in Europe start to wake up to this sort of thing, they might start asking, well, what actually does our government do with our money?
right,
I
right.
hope so.
Yeah, so I've taught all day today, so I have been off of the socials and off of the news feeds and whatnot. But right before I got on, I saw a story where, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it turns out that one of the things that this USAID apparently funded was Politico,
Yeah.
which
Main,
is, yeah. So what is Politico? If you can tell my audience, and what are the how are you reacting to the possibility that Politico might be being funded by the USAID?
yeah, Politico is a very important online news organization founded by a former Washington Post senior reporter. It is vital to what happens in Washington. Everybody in Washington reads it. It covers political news.
So like
Yeah,
just below the level of like WAPO and New York Times, is
yeah,
it
yeah,
like
yeah.
okay, okay,
Yeah, or maybe even at that level in
mm,
terms of its effect in
okay,
Washington,
okay,
because
okay,
it moves very quickly. I mean, it's liberal, but it's you read it, and they also have a politico.eu here in. Well, it
okay.
turns out that USAID spent 8.1 million to Politico.
I mean,
What? What? What?
yeah. So, well, I mean, again, I'm asking you as a, I know, as a journalist. I mean, as someone that this is your world, brother. I mean, what are the implications of the fact that this is some sort of weird backdoor funding for explicitly left of center, right?
Sure, sure.
that kind of left of center way that the blob, operates under. Like,
No, it's
what are the
journalism that
implications of?
supports. It's journalism that supports the establishment
Yeah,
narrative, right?
right, right.
And I don't look. If the government didn't fund Politico, I don't think the Politico journalists would have any different opinion than they already do.
No, 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 no.
But
But it's propping up a very loud amplifier, a very
you
large
got it.
platform. No,
You got it. You got it. And I mean, this is where, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do love a good conspiracy from
yeah,
time to time.
yeah,
But this isn't a conspiracy. They're doing it. They're
yeah.
just, and nobody in Washington cares because all of this funding was buried so deep in the budget, and they got away with it. And it
Right.
was a
Okay.
ton of money.
Okay. Right. And so this is another thing that I'm hearing. It's well, I mean, it's just it's peanuts relative to sort of government expenditures, right?
Yeah.
That's a line that you're hearing now. Like, well, like this is all like just nothing, which I think is extremely misleading, to say the least. But what do you say to that? Come on,
Well,
Rod. We're
yeah.
talking about margins here. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I mean, compared to the defense budget and stuff
Right,
like that,
right.
it
Yeah,
is nothing. But again, that's the kind of position you would take if you don't really care, if you're just trying to distract from the fact that they're spending tons of money on stuff they ought not be funding. And even if it's nothing, even if you accept that, what are they funding? They're funding things that run directly counter to what I think are American interests and what I think are the interests of ordinary people. I mean, if you go in around Eastern Europe, where I live, wherever I go, when they find out I'm from America, you start talking to these folks, And the people who are older and who lived through communism will eventually come around to saying, we used to love America, we used to trust America, and now we're scared of you because our government is pushing all of this super liberal stuff on them and making funding dependent on that. We just got rid here in Hungary when Biden went out, the American ambassador to Hungary, a guy named David Pressman, openly gay, married to a guy, and he made it his business here in Hungary as America's chief diplomat to constantly criticize the Hungarian government. Okay, I mean, the United States doesn't have to approve of everything Hungary does, but what kind of diplomat makes it his business to trash frequently the host country? I mean, this is the kind of thing that most Hungarians absolutely love America. America's pop culture is huge here. But come on, man. Is this really in America's interest to do this?
And let's remember that the whole idea of USAID or USAID, I think that's the way people pronounce it. It's supposed to be some sort of charity outfit. Like that's the cover story. Yeah. And so I wanted to show you something that I found. It's a kind of bog standard. It's a bog standard article here on NBC News. And if you, I know you can't see it. Let me see if I can see it. Expand it a little bit here. I just wanted to sort of, again, I wanted to, for the audience, right? This is kind of classic. Do you want to call it newspeak? Do you want to call it double speak? But I mean, it's something out of Orwell. If you have your eye and ear tuned to a specific frequency. So Rod, knowing now what we know about the USAID and kind of what it's been up to, look at the way that this is an NBC News, Elizabeth Chuck is a reporter for NBC News. Look at the way that she says this, right? So the U.S. Agency for International Development is at the center of a political firestorm after the Trump administration indicated it will shut it down as an independent agency and possibly move it under the State Department in a larger effort to crack down on federal bureaucracy. Okay, so an independent agency. Well, what exactly does it mean to have an independent agency of the federal government? Okay, fine. USAID delivers billions of dollars, Rod, in humanitarian aid overseas. Funding that advocates say provide a critical lifeline to more than 100 countries at only a small fraction of the overall federal budget. So right there, you can see exactly the way that this gets framed. This is court bullshit. This is
right, Kale. People will die if they don't have their lifeline to get the trans comics and
right. So, but again, knowing what we know, but nowhere in this article are you going to see the fact that they're funding all of these truly wacky stuff. I mean, really wacky, classic Dreher bait stuff, right? Okay, so let's just USAID delivers billions of dollars you made overseas, blah, blah. Okay. And it's merely a fraction of the federal budget, Rod, don't you know? Nonetheless, despite all these amazing things, President Donald Trump over the weekend criticized it as being run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and tech billionaire Elon Musk, who heads his government efficiency initiative, called USAID a criminal organization. Now, notice that they don't attach any kind of, why did Musk say this? Why did Donald Trump say this? They don't provide any of the sort of the reasons. We continue. The agency has an uncertain future. NBC News has reported that Trump administration officials have discussed placing USAID under the authority of the State Department, according to more than a dozen sources. On Monday, Musk announced the administration was working to shutter the agency a week after hundreds of USAID contractors were placed on unpaid leave and some were terminated following a freeze on U.S. foreign aid that Trump imposed worldwide. USAID's office in Washington was closed Monday, and employees were told to work remotely. The developments come after USAID's director of security and his deputy were put on administrative leave and after reportedly denying Musk's cost-cutting task force to its secure systems Saturday. What does USAID do, and why are Musk and Trump so critical of it? Read on for more information. Of course, then it goes into this. I've read it, right? And this goes into when it was formed.
Poverty.
Right. Exactly, Rod. Exactly.
Nobody cares about it. People are happy to alleviate poverty. That's not why Trump is mad at it.
That's right. And so it provides absolutely zero backdrop. It's all this sort of notice. All of the control mechanisms are wired into those first three paragraphs, so that you never actually ask the question, "Well, is what they're saying true?" Of course not. This is critical care, Rod
How
Dreher.
dare
This is
you ask
critical.
that?
How dare
Well,
and of course those nasty, snarly, Trump administrative stooges, want to make poor people suffer. It's so, God, it's just so plain and obvious. It's
yeah,
so painful to see.
and getting, Elon Musk, whether you like him or not, he was sent in by the executive, by the chief executive, to audit this
Right,
place. You don't, you people work for the chief executive, and they
right.
don't feel like they have to be accountable to anybody.
Well,
Kale.
so Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer are like, beating the podium, like, this is a hostile takeover of the government. You're like, it's called an election. It's called
Yeah.
an executive branch, right? Ron, I wonder, is this the first time that we have seen an actual transfer of power in the United States of America in our lifetime?
That's a good point.
No, I actually mean this. I actually mean this.
Yeah, I mean, like in the UK, because when new parties take over, there is a greater change of policy, generally speaking,
Yeah.
because things are run by a new government with new priorities, and that's the problem with Washington is, and I think most people see this, and that's why Donald Trump got elected, is the faces come and go, but nothing really changes. I mean, look, for as long as you and I have been politically aware, back
Mm,
when we were teenagers,
yeah.
Republicans have talked about shutting down the Department of
Right.
Education. It was
Right.
bullshit. They
Yeah.
don't want to do that.
Totally.
And
Totally.
they get to Washington and they get co-opted by the blob,
Yeah.
and they don't want to face hostile media and things like that. It took a guy like Donald Trump who, I guess if you've been shot at and they missed, you don't care anymore. It took him to do this. Cale, I remember when I was just starting out my career as a journalist, I was working for the Washington Times in the
Yeah.
early 1990s. At the time when, after the Republic, it was 94, I think, when
Yeah.
there was a Republican revolution, when the Republicans took over the
Gingrich and
House, the
all of that.
Gingrich
Yeah.
Revolution.
Yeah.
And funding for the National Endowment for the Arts
Yeah.
became a big issue. Man, the stuff that they were paying for. I remember there was a guy then called Ron Athey. He was an HIV positive gay man
Uh-huh.
who they had funded, our government funded a show in which he was having somebody come on stage, uh, cut his back wide open, soak the HIV infected blood up with towels, and send them out over the audience on a clothesline, right? We were paying for that.
It's like,
And
why? Yeah.
and Jesse Helms, the arch conservative senator from North Carolina, I believe it was, he was outraged appropriately about that. But the way the blob responded was, "How dare you? How dare you go after art?" Because most people think that what the NEA funded was like museums and concerts, and there was some of
Or
that,
like after school art programs for disadvantaged kids. Like, what kind of monster doesn't want
right?
disadvantaged kids to learn how to, do finger painting, Rod Dreher?
Right, and I think most taxpayers would be fine with that, but that's not what they did. And so when I see these people outraged and furious and weeping and wailing and gnashing their teeth and rending their garments over
Mm,
what Trump is doing, I'm like, you people brought it on yourselves.
mm,
You went so far outside any reasonable mandate of what U.S. aid should be doing, to advance the Cultural Revolution. And now, finally, somebody who was elected by the American people and who has the authority and the mandate to
mm,
govern
mhm.
is governing, and they can't handle it.
I think of somebody like Samantha Power, who did she just stop being the head of USAID?
I guess when the Biden administration went out, she did
Oh,
too.
okay. I'm curious as to who was going to take it over in the Trump administration, but now it appears it's working under the auspices of Marco Rubio, Secretary Rubio, and the State Department, at least temporarily, until they can kind of sort some things out. But I'm starting to wonder, like, what a powerful position. Like, honestly, like the sort of the purse strings, the patronage power of a thing like USAID is really an extraordinary thing to consider. And I looked up her bio. She's a classic. She's classic American managerial class, right?
Yeah,
Went to the right
managerial liberal
schools.
elites.
Yeah, and she's married to Cass
Is she? Oh wow,
yeah,
of
it
course.
just
Of course.
and by the way, that's a funny little rabbit hole you can always dive down is look up one of these swamp creatures and look who they're married to. They're always married to each other, dude. Every freaking time. Either they are a member of another news organization or they're a professor at one of the Ivy League schools. It is remarkably incestuous. It's just
Mhm.
really telling. And to your point, though, Rod, if they had just been a little bit more modest, this is
Yeah.
almost like a classic story, a classic parable of hubristic overreach on the part of these folks to sort of keep pushing these sort of things. I mean, I can imagine a scenario in which they could have sort of kept their head down just a little bit and continued to be able to operate this way for in perpetuity.
Sure. But you know how it is with these people. I mean, this is what the Biden administration showed. You get this, semi compos mentis president who
Semi,
gave,
semi,
yeah,
dude.
well, I'm being generous
All
here.
right, fine. You be
All
generous.
right.
I'm not so
So
generous.
so he comes in and he lets progressives, have the run of the place. And they went so far, and with DEI, with trans, with all of it. I mean, you remember last year it came out that what's that man's name? Trans woman
Dylan
rape.
Mulvaney.
No, no, God, ran the health department. I can't believe I've forgotten this
Oh,
now.
Rachel Levine.
Rachel Levine.
Rachel Levine.
Richard, yeah. Well, Rachel Levine actually intervened to try to get the WPATH, the governing body for trans medicine worldwide, to change the science to make it easier to throw government money at transing children. That is that it just blows your mind. It was reported, the New York Times reported it, and then it quickly dropped. Because these people don't think they are accountable to anybody. They're on the right side of history. They're morally right. The people who oppose them are not just wrong, but evil. And so I don't think they actually thought they would ever be held accountable. And now it's happening. Trump is really draining the swamp this time, and they don't know what hit him. That's one of the things that's really struck me about
Okay.
Trump doing all this. Man, he's
Yeah.
just coming out every day. There's something new, and he's moving so fast that these
Sometimes,
people,
like two things a day. Like it's a
yeah,
the speed. I think this, Rod, but I know some people who worked in the transition team in the winter of 16 and into the administration in 17 and 18. And I really heard some sort of inside stories about this, and I actually did a post on this the other day that kind of went a little bit nuts. But he told me, and has always insisted to me, is that Kale, you don't understand what it was like to be in the Trump transition team and in the Trump White House those first months. He said none of them had a chance to do anything other than respond to Russia, Russia, Russia. He
hmm
said it was like living in a Cat 5 hurricane that it was like every day there was new. And what we know about that now, of course, is shocking and sad that it's a total deep state.
yeah.
What do you call that? What is this, Rod?
It was
What
an
do we call that?
operation. I mean,
Yeah, it's
look,
Oppo. That's right. That's right.
the 51 former senior intelligence
Right.
officials, including former CIA directors, who signed that letter like 2 weeks before the 2020 election, saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story was almost certainly Russian disinformation.
Right.
That they may. I mean, I'm speechless here because it was so outrageous, and
Mhm.
so Trump cut off all of their access, all their security clearances. Good, because they got involved as political actors,
Right. Right.
to shut down the truth because it didn't fit the narrative. Because, to use Catherine Meyer's words, we couldn't find consensus if people kept
Oh
insisting
man.
on things like this Hunter Biden laptop might be real.
Right, 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 right,
And
right.
I got to say, in the first Trump administration, there was so much resistance to him within the deep state. He
Mm,
learned from that. Um,
clearly.
we're seeing now all across outside the government too. Some of our side is claiming victory. We've defeated DEI.
Yeah,
Wokeness is on the way out. And to the extent that we've had victories, I'm thrilled by it. But
sure.
I want to caution people that
Yeah,
they've taken a blow, the wokesters and the DEI folks, but this stuff is like a religion for them.
yeah.
And you can't expect them to say, oh, okay, you got us. We've lost this one. We'll go find something else to do. They're going to fight back as hard as they can and are going to find ways to resist this and they're not going to stop at anything. We have got to make sure that these people are crushed. And I'm not talking about, please understand me. I'm not talking about physically harming
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
I'm saying that we can't just assume that because we've defunded their program that or it's now not cool to have a DEI department in your company or whatever, that it's all going to just go away. They're going to find some way to come back because for them, they're fighting a holy war. For us, it's just a matter of trying to return to common sense. But for them, you wouldn't expect some jihadist to just give up because he suffered a setback.
Right, right. So this kind of brings me, I want to tie this to what we've been talking about with the sort of the way that the establishment media has is still attempting to frame these. And I realize that so much of what we are watching right now, um I mean, and I would even say perhaps the Trump victory is, all of this is essentially possible because that fateful day when 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 Elon Musk on I think it was October of 2022, sometime in October of 2022, Elon Musk decides to buy then Twitter, now X. And I was thinking yesterday, it was after classes and I was kind of cleaning up and I saw something on Twitter about, whatever these first days where, what is it, the Bannon line, like flooding the zone and all that kind of stuff. And they're not wrong about this. And it occurred to me that the power of having one alternative platform with the kind of reach that
Mhm.
X has means that the kind of skullduggery that the blob has gotten away with for so long, it's now possible actually to find traction outside of those normal platforms. And I truly believe that what we're seeing going on in the opening weeks of this administration, clearly, seen in relief to what went on the first weeks of his first
Mhm.
administration. But what we're seeing happen and unfold right now is downstream from that October 2022 decision from
Mhm.
Elon Musk. Like, he really changed the equation in ways that I don't know how much people actually appreciated. Do you feel like I'm overstating this?
No, I don't. And there's a reason why here in Europe, the blob in Brussels and in European capitals are terrified of Musk. They're trying to make
They
him out
hate
to
him.
be,
Yeah.
oh, they hate him so
Yeah.
much because he enables an alternative narrative to emerge. It's really amazing when I don't know about you, but whenever I go back to the US and talk to folks and
Yep.
like even conservatives who
Yeah.
aren't on Twitter,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
so much they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
stuff that would be really interesting to them and important. Like
Yeah.
Mike Benz went on Joe Rogan, but he's been all that particular episode has been all over Twitter, and that's how
Yeah.
I first heard about it.
Right.
Not only I mean, Musk has been an absolute key figure in all this, and just getting out information. And this is why the left always says it's disinformation. Well, their
Right.
definition of disinformation is information that doesn't that counters their narrative, just like their definition of democracy is people voting in ways they want you to vote. Now I think too that this last election we had is probably the first election in which the mainstream media, New York Times, Washington Post, the networks were less important than podcasters.
To say the least, Rod, to say the least. And what's shocking to me about this, that, you know, this is definitely the new media election. And if you just compare, you know, the several podcasting platforms that I think moved the needle, and you just compare dollars, you know, outlay expenditures between those handful of podcasts and the entire media apparatus.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I want to know, again, I know journalism is your beat, it's your bag, it's where you cut your teeth. How much longer can they sustain these kinds of losses? Because clearly they didn't learn a thing from 16. They didn't learn a thing from 20, and they didn't learn a thing from 2024.
No.
How can they justify? I mean, do you know how much Rachel Maddow makes a year, Rod? She makes over $20 million a year.
Wow.
A year. How? This is MSNBC. Okay, Megyn Kelly on her podcast, great podcast, by the way, you should all watch it. She draws more viewers than MSNBC.
I mean, that's crazy at some point.
How it's got to fall apart, right?
It's got to. It's really got to. In fact, Commentary Magazine has, the Neocon magazine has had for a long time a media column. But John Podhoretz, the editor, wrote something recently saying they're discontinuing the media column. They're
really,
because he said, you know, after this election, it's clear that the media just aren't nearly what they once were. Now they're still going to write about like new media, things like that. But
sure,
you know, the column analyzing what's the Washington Post up to, what are the networks, what is the New York Times, it just doesn't matter anymore. And I mean, but look, they've done it to themselves.
Right.
You always hear among my tribe of journalists, they lament that so many newspapers are dying. What is this going to do to local coverage and all that? And they have a point. I mean, we need these things, but look at Joe Rogan did this incredible interview with Mark Andreessen. You know,
great.
Silicon Valley.
By the way, Mark Andreessen's great. I love him. I every time he pops up, I watch the videos. He has blocked me on Twitter. I don't understand what I did. I'm bummed.
You don't know what you did.
I don't know what I did.
We all know what you did, Kale. Anyway.
Don't say it. No, anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
Anyway, so Andreessen gives this really good interview in which he talks in depth about why Silicon Valley turned towards Trump, why the CEOs turned toward Trump. I learned so much from that. He talks about not only what the Biden administration was doing in terms of demonetizing people, trying to debank people, but also he talked about how in 2006, when they were hiring all these young employees from Ivy League universities, everybody wanted to come in there, build up the company, carry on. By 2013, they were getting employees who wanted to come in and tear the company down because they had been radicalized in college.
Wow.
And he said that at most they were about 30% of the workforce in most Silicon Valley companies. But everybody else was too afraid to go against them because they were afraid of being called racist, homophobic, and all that. Andreessen went on to say that we CEOs would get together and said, we can't do this. These people that are on our dime are trying to tear us down. Now, I bring that up because this is incredible news.
Yeah.
Did it appear in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times, in the Washington? No. It appeared on Joe Rogan.
It's as if it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one day I was staring at the front page of the New York Times, and there's that little box in the top right-hand corner. I think it's on the top right-hand corner. It says something like all the news that's fit to print.
It's a long-time slogan.
Yeah. And I chewed on that. I've been chewing on this. And I used to read it one way, and now I read it another way. Like there's a double meaning in that little blurb, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Like all the news that's fit to print. I used to mean like, if it's important, we'll print it, right? That's kind of the gist. And now I see it as a sort of strange admission. Everything that is fit to print, in other words, is it up to our standards in order to promulgate as real and not unreal? And I do wonder about that. You and I have often joked offline about what would you think if you only read the New York Times?
You'd be like that guy sitting next to me at dinner in Oxford
Right,
who
right,
had this crazy
right.
distorted view of actual existing America. And who was it? Michael
But
Crichton.
but to your point, you would not know what Andreessen laid out to Joe Rogan. And think about that, Rod. Think about you. You were I'm sure a professional, and you go into work every day and you do important things and you stay in your lane and you do your things and you think you're doing your job by being an informed citizen, and yet you don't know the skullduggery of what your government has been up to against its own citizens for no cause. Like you
And
don't know that.
do you remember when Trump was elected, the Washington Post adopted this motto, put it on their front page: "Democracy dies in darkness."
Yes,
Hello,
yes, I
Elon
know.
Musk is shining light into the dark corners of government agencies, and they hate it.
We don't want it. We don't want it. We
We
don't
don't
want to
want
know.
that light. We want to keep that darkness. What's it? It was Michael Crichton, the guy who wrote Jurassic Park. He
Yeah.
had this, I think he called it the Gelman effect or something. I forget where that comes from. But anyway, he said that, when he reads the daily paper, this came out in the 90s. He said when he reads the daily paper and they're talking about his own industry, screenwriting and books,
Yeah.
he knows how crazy they are, how far off the mark the
Right.
reporting is.
Right.
And then he turns a page and reads about industries he knows nothing about and just accepts it as real.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes. Yes.
why should I do this?
Yeah.
And
That's so good.
I'm that way about whenever I read journalism about religion, for example, because I'm a
Yep.
religious person and I'm a religious conservative. But I want serious reporting about religion, even if it doesn't agree with my priors. But man, when you see what the mainstream media do, they don't know what they're talking about. I remember I used to be at the Dallas Morning News, which had an award-winning religion section. They killed
Uh,
it years ago, but for a while it used to win awards, and they were hardworking. But it was incredible to see that if there was, I don't know, a three-toed lesbian Tibetan nun
yeah.
who came to town, I was going to make it there.
Yeah.
But the fact that Dallas was a place with massive mega churches and things like that, it was largely invisible.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
now I don't want to overstate this. They did do a lot of good coverage, but the bias was clearly towards progressive religion. And
Well, look,
th-
Rod. When you control the frame, you in essence control the shot. You control the truth, right? This is why I said at the top of the show, one of the things that I want to do with this platform is, shift the camera just like a hit to the left or a hit to the right, and what are you seeing? What are you seeing off frame or just out of frame,
Mhm.
right? Because the frame you would think is a way to sort of focus your attention, which is the way a frame is supposed to. But what I think we fail to think about more frequently is what does the frame exclude?
Exactly.
And I'm reminded of just a few days ago, there was a brilliant, there was a picture of a party at the inauguration, and it was this close-in shot on a bunch of sort of very beautiful, very young, very white party goers
Oh,
in
cover of New
fantastic
York
dresses on
Magazine.
the
Yeah.
cover of New York Magazine, right? And the headline was like, the cruel table is now back in power, like sort of making a riff on high school dynamics and all of that. And just off the frame are a whole host of non-white people, for lack of, in other words, it was not the sort of this Aryan white supremacist soiree
Mhm.
that the picture framed. And so the real story of that story was what it excluded, not what it included.
Sure. And in fact,
And
the guy who hosted that party was a black Republican.
oh, that's so funny. That's so
Yeah.
funny. I didn't know that.
Um, well, I can give you an example from my own work. You might be happy to know that the documentary film based on my book "Live Not by Lies" will be out on April 1st. And I've seen
great.
it's
That's
coming out
great.
from Angel Studios. I've seen a rough cut of it, and it's just terrific, really good. The
Cannot wait.
light, yeah. But that my book, The Benedict Option, which got a ton of press coverage, came out in 2017. It sold well.
Yeah.
Live Not by Lies came out in 2020, September 2020, the same year as COVID, the same year, or right after the summer of
How
Floyd.
much coverage did it get in the press, Rod? How much?
Zero.
Oh, that's right. A
Zero.
big donut. A big donut,
Nothing.
Rod.
And it has sold more than twice as many copies in the US as
In
the
the Ben Op?
Benedict Option. Yep.
Wow, I did not know that.
More than twice. And
Wow.
it was word of mouth and podcasts.
Yeah.
Now, the Ben Op sold well. Live Not by Lies sold very well, but it was just interesting to me how Live Not by Lies coming out when it did in 2020,
Yeah.
and questioning the narrative in fact, calling DEI and all of this stuff a form of soft totalitarianism, zero attention from the media, none. And I'm not griping about that like they cost me sales. Again, the book sold well. I'm grateful for that. But it's just really interesting how when I was their darling when I was writing earlier, but not now.
Well, and again, it's a convenience issue. And so going back to that idea, like, so the New York Times, and if you're sort of following my little construction here, is that the New York Times did not see it fit to print anything about Live Not by Lies. Now, the ironies abound on that one, right? Because the whole point of your book, right, is that we are entering into this sort of phase of soft totalitarianism, and we need to sort of stand up for what's true. But it's so hilarious, frankly, and revealing that this is exactly the choice that the New York Times made with that.
You know who was also a really big factor here? Barry Weiss. She is a center left lesbian millennial, I think, who worked for the New York Times. But she quit because she was so fed up by how the news was being crushed and how you could not stand up in that newsroom and argue for more fair coverage in 2020, or you were denounced as a racist, a fellow traveler of bigots, and all that. So she left and started the Free Press.
Yeah.
Now, I tweeted out something earlier today about how there's a tradition since Reagan, at least, of a certain magazine being like the in-house, the flight magazine of Air Force One.
Yes, that's right.
So National Review was that for Reagan, New Republic for Clinton, the Weekly Standard for Bush.
Yep.
Well, I don't think we've had one for the others. I'm starting to think that the Free Press, though it's not a conservative publication, is that for Trump, because it is so contrarian and it is shining a light into areas that need to be exposed, and it's not an ideological publication at all. It is what an old-fashioned newspaper used to be.
Do I agree? I don't know if I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with you, Rod.
Yep.
I think there's a frame there, right?
There's a frame everywhere, right?
Yeah, well, right. Look, I like her stuff. I read her stuff. I listen to her podcast. So I don't throw hate there, but she's a darling for a reason, and I can't quite put my finger on it. But I'm fine with it. It's certainly much more important that she's doing what she's doing rather than suffering under the jackboot of the New York Times editorial board. But
right. Okay. Well, here's an example. Uri Berliner was a 25-year employee of NPR. He published, and a liberal, he published a piece in the Free Press calling out the outrageous bias and the culture of conformity at NPR. And he had to go after that. Where else would that have appeared if not the Free Press? If it had appeared in a right-wing magazine,
it was ignored. Yeah,
it would have been ignored. But it appeared in the Free Press, which publishes liberal stuff, publishes some conservative stuff, but they seem to have a bias towards what's interesting and runs counter the official narrative.
Yeah.
So it got published there. It made a huge blow up. And there's going to be Catherine Meyer from NPR has been called before Congress to testify soon. I'm sure they're going to use, the Republicans are going to use everything Uri Berliner wrote to inform their questions. And, I do I agree with everything in the free press? Of course not.
No,
But
that's not the point. Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
don't mean.
always check it though because
Yeah,
there's just interesting stuff there.
yeah. That's what I find. Exactly that there's a way. I find that she captures my attention because she's printing things that people don't print, and people are saying some intriguing and important things. What I want to talk to you now, Rod, and is we've talked about real conventional things right now. We have for the first segment. I want to talk to you about weird things. I want to talk to you
Oh,
about what
good.
you know about. Look, your book came out, and hopefully is sort of shining a
Living
light.
in wonder, you mean?
Well, yeah, living in wonder. You're talking about this hot topic of enchantment, and we are seeing it all over the place. I wonder if what you are trying to draw our attention to is still not being taken seriously by the vast chunk of normal news readers, followers of the scene. And what do you see is going on with all the weird, all the strange, all the enchantment stuff? And what do you make of people's reactions to your book?
You know, that's a really good question. I mean, I've had great reviews. In fact,
Mhm.
there's only, as far as I know, there's only been one somewhat negative review, and it was by a Calvinist, right? Who was bothered by the whole mystery and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how well the book has sold because I'm at a new publisher, Zondervan, and
Right. Didn't tell you.
they don't provide a tool to let you check that. And me being me, I'm scared. I'm like, oh, I'm sure the sales have been terrible, and I can't see. All right, I'm a weirdo
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
But
You are. You are.
I think that things are moving. The culture is very unstable, and I think the narrative is going to move very quickly towards this. I have a sense that the reason most normies aren't really thinking about this as much as they should, the whole re-enchantment dialogue, whether it's religious or from the occult or
Mhm.
whatever, is because the mainstream media is not giving them signals that they can talk about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, but one of the things that in every interview I do for the book, I always bring up this guy, Daniel Kim. He's in the book that he was 27 years old when he came to me, the Anglican seminarian who told me that in 2022 on a trip in Oxford that your generation of Christians has no idea what's going on with my generation. And he
Yeah.
talked about how overwhelming the occult is. I was in Oxford just last week, as I mentioned, and right next to Blackwell's, the great bookstore on Broad Street, there is the one of the libraries. It's part of the Bodleian, the official college library. And in their shop, there were all these books in the shop window about the tarot cards, divination, stuff like that. This stuff is there. It's right there in
Mhm.
Oxford, one of the great universities of the world. And I just don't think the mainstream media has begun to look at this yet. And I one of my favorite stories from the Gospels is when Jesus goes and sets free the Gerasene demoniac. You'll
Mhm.
remember this guy, he's demon possessed, and they keep him in this village. They keep him chained up in a cemetery so he won't hurt people. Jesus frees him of his demons, and the Bible says restored him to his right mind.
Mhm.
And he sent the demons out into a herd of pigs who throw
Mhm.
themselves off the cliff.
Mhm.
So you would think that most people in seeing this would think, wow, tell us, who are you? Why did you do
Right.
this?
Right.
Tell us more. Can you
Yeah.
heal us? But no, the Bible tells us they told Jesus, get out of town. Now,
Get
why
out.
did
Yeah.
they do that? They did that because it was too frightening to them. He came there and upset their understanding of the way the world was.
Mhm.
They would
Mhm.
have rather had this guy, this poor demoniac, suffer because that made sense to them than to see him healed if it rocked their understanding of the world. Now, I think that's human nature, right? And I think that so much resistance by normies to the whole re-enchantment narrative has to do with people being desperate to hold on to their view of the world. but news and things that are happening are really breaking that. I mean, you and I are both followers of the whole UFO UAP narrative, dude. The stuff coming out now, at some point, it has got to break into the mainstream. I heard recently, I was told on good authority about a scientist, a well-known scientist. I've told you his name privately, but I can't mention it here,
Mhm.
who has been skeptical of the UAP thing, but open to talking to people. He's been talking to a lot of whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Since Trump came in, all of these same whistleblowers have come back to him with tons more information because they told him, we don't feel afraid of being prosecuted anymore. And this guy, this
Wait. What
skeptical,
do you mean? What do you mean?
they were afraid that under Biden, that they would have to face prosecution for break their NDAs, their non-disclosure
That's so
agreements.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's so interesting to me. I don't know what to do with that information. Keep going.
yeah.
Sorry. All
But
right.
the information, from what I was told by someone who's close to this scientist, is the new information that has been brought to him by people he trusts is so overwhelming that it has moved the ball for him. And now he thinks something really big is going on and is going to come out soon. Now, we know if you follow this world, you know that, oh, any day now,
Always, any day. Yeah.
disclosure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have to be skeptical of that. Nevertheless, if you go down, just spend one evening, I would say to your listeners, going down the rabbit hole on some of these podcasts, like Jesse Michael's
Yeah.
podcast. That's a
Great,
really
great
high
podcast.
quality one,
Yep.
doing interviews, or Ross Coulthard. And you're like, why aren't people talking about this outside of our internet circles? It's one. This is perhaps a great, a fantastic example of what you're talking about building the frame to exclude things
Yeah.
that don't fit a preconceived narrative. Now, I've said, I say it in the book, and I'll say it here. I think that UFOs are real, but I think it's ultimately a demonic phenomenon. Are they specifically demons, or is it something just broadly demonic? I would say broadly demonic. I could be wrong. I could
Mhm.
be wrong, but we have to talk about it. But people who work in the media curating the narrative, they have no conception of this. It seems scary to them and weird. And they'll be like I was 2 years ago, Kale. You know this story.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I thought, well, maybe it could be real. I don't care, because my idea about the UFOs was stuck in the early 90s,
Right.
first season of X Files.
Right.
And
Right.
then a
Right.
friend of mine, a Catholic journalist I know, challenged me. He said, no, this is a really important emerging religion story. I said, all right, fine. What should I read? And he suggested Diana Pasulka's book, American
Mhm.
Cosmic, a couple other things. It it blew me away. There you have it. There you have it.
Mhm.
Because she's a serious person, right? She's a scholar
Mhm.
who covers religion. And one of the things she writes about is UFO culture as an emerging religion. And one of the things she told me the first time I talked to her, I did interview her for my book, Living in Wonder. She said, the thing you have to keep in mind when you go into this world is you can't believe anything you hear on face value, because there's
That's right. Yeah.
so much deception here. And I mean, that's a fantastic caveat. Nevertheless, there's something going on here, and we've got
So
to start paying attention to it.
agree wholeheartedly. I truly believe this is something we have to pay attention to. And full disclosure, I'm like you, Rod. Like I'm Christian, and so I don't feel as I have nothing to fear uh, in any kind of grand cosmic sense, right? And so, but
Mhm.
what I find that sort of the two kinds of responses that I get, one is oh, Kale is just a cuckoo clock. Like fine. But the pushback I get the most are from other Christians who are offended by the notion that that the world is as strange as it's becoming increasingly clear it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
And these are, and again, this is not a liberal or a conservative thing. This is not
sure,
even a
sure.
left wing or this is you know almost every group of Catholic that I might encounter online or Christian Orthodox online, so many of them are like, they're angry actually when I talk about this, and they dismiss me as a kind of quack. they dismiss me as I'm just a conspiracy theorist. I'm chasing after these things, and all of which are unfair. But fine, like what do I care, right?
Yeah.
But I'm struck by the anger of their reaction and the name calling. I mean, almost immediately.
Yeah.
What do you make of that, Rod? I mean,
it's people.
I don't. You and I haven't talked about this. You and I have not talked about this. But I mean, like, it's striking to me.
It's people desperate to hold on to a narrative that makes sense to them.
Well, what is that narrative?
Well, the narrative is that the world is controllable.
Right.
It's a modernist narrative.
Right.
I mean, one of the things that has really struck me in writing this book and watching the reaction to this book is how so many American Christians have absorbed so many of the tenets of modernity into the faith.
Yeah, the presuppositions, right? Yeah.
Right. And and especially Cartesian mind-body dualism,
Totally.
by which I mean, Descartes had this belief that there is a big separation between the mind and the outside world, including the body, and that things that were things that were real to the mind.
Right.
And this is contrary to traditional Christianity, right? Which prior to the modern era, which began around 1500 with the Scientific Revolution and the Protestant Reformation, Christians were so much more comfortable with mystery of the unexplained. Mark Andreessen, in that same Joe Rogan interview we mentioned earlier, he dropped this really interesting anecdote. He said a Catholic university professor friend of his told him that a medieval peasant would be psychologically better able to comprehend and deal with the things that are happening now and are going to happen than a modern person. Because, and he didn't elaborate on that, but I think I understood what he meant, that in the modern world, we are even Christians are so dependent on control. The idea that everything is rational, that we can understand everything and control it. So much Christianity today, and I'm talking about even among Orthodox and Catholics who are sacramental, it's mostly about, it's basically Protestantized in the sense of, it's about ethics and morals and prayer, for sure.
And again, audience, Rod has always been a very broad, small O Orthodox Christian. He's not trying to score cheap denominational points. Please listen to what he's saying here, please.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking last week in Oxford with a Pentecostal. And we were agreeing that the Pentecostals are a branch of Protestantism that is totally comfortable. They're totally comfortable with mystery. I mean, they come at it from a very Protestant perspective. They're certainly post-Catholic, post-Orthodox. But he was saying that his own denomination, Pentecostals, are booming around the world, in part because they recognize the mysterious. They recognize that spiritual warfare is a real thing. And so should at least Orthodox and Catholics, because we have exorcists, right? And I tell you, if you doubt any of this, if you doubt the weirdness of the world, go listen to Father Carlos Martin's podcast, The Exorcist Files.
That's right.
It's incredible. It's based on real life things, and there's so much information out there. And
it's remarkable. Sorry to interrupt, Rod, but can you just draw a quick parallel between what you just said about exorcisms, et cetera, and what you implied and said about the UAP flat contact disclosure phenomena? Because in my ears, they sound remarkably similar.
Yeah, well, that's why I think that UAPs and UFOs are ultimately demonic. There's a guy, Chris Bledsoe. He's a huge name in UFO circles.
I'm familiar.
An ordinary guy from, I think, South Carolina, one of the Carolinas.
Sounds very Carolina.
Yeah, and he has had encounters since I think 2008, and he's got videos all on his Twitter of summoning these orbs. He really can do this. And there's an episode of, I forget the name of it, something on History Channel, where they go there to film him. They outfit his head at night with.
Is this Skinwalker?
It might be, Skinwalker Ranch. They outfit him with an EEG and have a neuroscientist there to monitor his brain waves when he summons these things. You can see on camera, these orbs are, when he summons them, they come and they're hovering in the sky above him, and his brain waves are in an incredibly deep meditative state. the neuroscientist says that we've only seen this level with like advanced meditators, like Tibetan
Right.
monks who've been at it for a
Right.
while.
Right.
Something is happening there. What Bledsoe says is that an Egyptian goddess appeared to him, and she's basically there to tear down Christianity.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
Bledsoe's son went on a podcast and said later that he left Christianity
yeah.
after his father was doing all this, and he's here to make a new revelation to the world.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
this is. I'm going to go be super crazy
Go ahead.
here, but
Yeah.
In Christian teaching, in the book of Revelation, and elsewhere in Scripture, we're told that before the last days there will be a grand religious deception. The Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about this, but I've always wondered, well, what could that be? I think this could be it. I'm not saying that we are in the last days. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I'm beginning to see how the widespread, not only the loss of Christianity that began in the 20th century, got really underway in the 20th century, and it's accelerating now. Not only that, but the loss of any kind of knowledge of small o Orthodox Christianity that can anchor people in some structure, some epistemological structure and moral structure outside of themselves. That prepares the way for this. So when I see Christians talking about, oh, the UFOs are really angels who are coming to us. This guy, Jake Barber, he's another big whistleblower, military guy. I think he sounds credible.
Yeah.
He
Very.
He has talked about on the Jesse Michaels podcast about how when he was on a team that recovered an egg-shaped craft, he had an experience like so many of these experiencers do, where it wasn't just a physical thing. Somehow there was something numinous. They became aware that they were in the presence of some spiritual power. It interacted with their consciousness. And he talked about how an orb now comes and hovers over his house from time to time. His kids see it, the neighbors see it, and he thinks this is all a good and wonderful power. I'm like, so this is a religious story.
Yeah, it really is a religious story. And I've got two things. Number one, I honestly have come to I don't believe that there's such thing as proof, right? In other words, people don't want to believe it. They're not going to believe it. I really firmly hold to that. Secondly, what do you know about the Antichrist and like the anti-gospel in terms of messaging? Because to me, it's setting off all kinds of bells in my imagination when I hear these people talk about that the experiences is like it's enlightenment and
peace
and love, right? Yeah, no. What do you know about that, and how are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing?
Yeah, I am. And the Scripture tells us that when the Antichrist appears, he will promise people peace and safety and well-being, and they will be drawn to that because the world will be in great chaos. I was just last weekend in Bratislava, capital of Slovakia, having dinner with my friend Vlado Palko. Vladimir Palko is a retired mathematician, former interior minister of the country, and a very faithful Catholic. Mm-hmm. In 2015, he published a book called The Lions Are Coming, and it's about the rise of anti-Christian persecution in Europe. Somebody got to him, got a German translation of the book to Pope Benedict XVI, who was in retirement then. Vlado opened his mailbox one day, and there was a personal letter from Pope Benedict to him, congratulating him on the book.
Yeah.
And he said at the very end, Pope Benedict did, the power of the Antichrist is rising. We have to pray for strong leaders in the church. Now, when a former pope and a figure as intellectual as Benedict says that, attention must be paid.
So you're saying the note was written in 2015, 2016?
2015, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, hello. Like, whoa.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that, we can't know the time or the hour, but we might be able to know the general time. And I believe that, imagine this, Cale. What would happen, do you think, if the government has full disclosure and these NHIs, as they're called, non-human intelligences, say, guess what? We're the ones who invented all religions.
Right.
of mankind, but we're here to give you the real stuff. I think that most people, I mean, there will be some resistance to it from Christians, but I think a lot of people have been conditioned by popular culture of the 20th century, 21st century, to expect this sort of thing, to expect salvation and enlightenment coming from above. I think so many people will fall into that, and we will see so many apologists within the Christian churches, all of them saying, "Oh, we need to accept this new revelation," and
Right. Right.
we're just thoroughly against the gospel, but we'll
Right.
be
Because
so dazzled.
the gospels and the churches have been so clear about that, have they not? Right. Uh that the message is complete, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that things come and go, but like the message is fundamentally complete,
Mhm.
which is why I think, interestingly enough, Mormons are really fine with all this. Like a
Yeah.
lot, like, because they're already open to kind of like a new weird space religion, right? When you poke around, and so too Scientologists, interestingly enough, which of course brings me to sort of the weird, crazy, wacky crossover with between aliens and strange sex magic crazy stuff, right?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah, yeah.
I told somebody this story the other night, and it just blew their mind. Can we talk
Which is
about it?
funny because like you and I have these conversations all the time. Like we talk about, these weird things. And so it's all kind of like normal for me. But as soon as I say it out loud to people, they're like,
Oh,
what?
I
Like,
know.
yeah,
I know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
see,
yeah,
that's just it, because most people have no idea, but this really happened.
yeah,
The founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena was a guy named Jack Parsons,
yeah.
who blew himself up in a failed home rocket experiment in the 1950s.
Oopsies.
Parsons,
Oopsies.
oops,
Sorry. Sorry. Sorry.
Parsons was an open and ardent occultist. He was a follower of Aleister Crowley,
Mhm.
the famous British occultist. Aleister Crowley preached something called sex magic, where he said that the more perverted sex you do, the greater you will grow in spiritual power.
Right.
Well, Parsons did that, and he had this house that they called the Parsonage out in
Yeah.
Los Angeles, which was basically a sex cult.
Right.
Well, in I think it was 1946 or 47, he and, surprise, L. Ron Hubbard,
Amazing.
his
Amazing.
his associate L. Ron Hubbard, went out to the desert to do what they call the Babylon working. What they were trying to do was to call down the goddess Babylon into this realm to change the world. They did a bunch of rituals in the desert, and that was that. Weirdly enough, like 2 weeks after they finished, that's when the modern era of UFO sightings really kicked off with that guy,
Right.
Kenneth Arnold, the pilot, and I think it was Oregon, who saw what he described as flying saucers. And then we were off to the races. Now, it's really interesting that L. Ron Hubbard was part of that. And L. Ron Hubbard's own son said in an interview in the 70s that his father was a Satanist.
Yep.
Um, I I can't shake the idea that their Babylon working really did accomplish something. It opened up a dimension, a portal of some sort. I could be wrong. It's
Yeah.
crazy to talk about it,
Sure.
but you have this guy who, and that's one of the most amazing things. How many people involved in advanced tech are also into the occult,
Right.
and this is true in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Even
Uh,
today, like today, people. Yeah.
Yeah, Tara Isabella Burton wrote a piece. I forget where it appeared. We might Google it and put the link in
Yeah.
the
I'll put it
show
in the
notes.
description. I put it in the description. I know it.
Talking about why Silicon Valley, their mentality out there is so into the occult. I mean, she wrote this piece as, I mean, she's a scholar of religion, and she just wrote about it as a really interesting religion story.
Yeah.
But anyway, they all want enlightenment. And, I was rereading last night Diana Pasulka's most recent book called Encounters.
Mhm.
And she talks about this figure she calls Simone. And I found the
Ah.
last name of Simone
Yes.
somewhere.
Yes. What? Oh, that's a
Simone,
wild one, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
She's really high up executive in developing AI. And, she also is a so-called downloader. She communicates with these things. And she talks
It's
about,
just quick time out. What Rod is talking about right now is true. Okay, like you can read about this stuff. Like this is how she talks about her process. She's involved in all kinds of tech startups, silicon,
Oh yeah.
startups. She's like a real thing. She's a real person, and this is how she talks about her
Oh
work.
yeah.
You and I, if I have to write an article, I'll like go into my office and try to like work some things out on paper. No, she's got a whole protocol that she does to download this stuff. So anyway, I want to encourage the audience here,
Yeah.
go check this stuff out that me and Rod are talking about, because
Yeah.
it's wild.
Yeah. See, that's the thing, Kale. And this stuff is really happening,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
normies just can't accept it. They're like, "This must be crazy." And it's like, yeah, it sounds crazy, but it's really happening.
Right.
So Simona is working in AI, and she's not the only one who feels this way. She believes that AI is some sort of medium of communication with these entities. And she talks about it. In rereading the Pasulka book last night, I was really struck by how she talks about it as basically sacramental, in the way
That's
that
right.
you and I as Christians would call it sacramental.
That's right. That's right.
That these intelligences can communicate through matter
Yeah.
in AI and computers. And of course, she says that they're here to bring
Make
us
things
to,
better.
yeah, to enlightenment, and we'll
Yeah.
be free from poverty and all of these things.
And
It's what,
superstition and superstition.
yeah,
Remember,
yeah,
go. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
And so, and so I think that attention must be paid, because, yeah, sounds like new age crap, but some of the most powerful people in the world at the cutting edge of the development of the kind of technology that frames reality for the rest of us are totally into this,
Right.
right? And they
Right.
don't see it as anything sinister.
Right. And I correct. Right. And so my concern with this whole thing is like, look, I'm not so sure how much this is going to materially change or matter to me. I'm already Catholic. You're already Orthodox. Like, I already believe in really strange, weird things. Like, just read the Gospels, people. Like, it's weird. Okay. So I'm not really worried about this so much for me and mine. I'm really worried for people who are just not at all even remotely ready for this kind of shock.
Mhm.
I'm genuinely concerned, like, because
Yeah.
what happens to people when they confront, when they have this sort of this shock. It's
The ontological shock.
yeah, that's right.
Well,
I worry about
Pas-
that a lot.
Pasulka had said in her books that she's not worried about that, because religious people already believe quote unquote weird things. I mean, she herself is a Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that we Christians have so neutered the strangeness of our religion. The miracles and
Yes,
things,
yes.
and the weirdness that it might well be an ontological shock. I mean, when I talk to fellow Christians who believe that demons exist, when I just tell them stories that I picked
Yeah.
up from Exorcist, a lot of times they want me to stop. It scares them too
Yeah, yeah,
much.
yeah. Yeah,
And I say,
I'm
look,
sorry.
I don't want you to be. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, if I led you, I agree. When I say that the people are not ready, and that I'm not worried about me and mine, I really mean like me, my children, my family, like my
Yeah.
close associates. I'm very well. Let me be very clear. I'm very worried about what you and I sort of. I don't mean to be so disrespectful, but what you and I call normie Christians. Like, I'm very worried for normie
Mhm.
Christians, because I think a lot of them are going to be exposed as. I think we're going to see. Well, I can imagine a scenario. That's a better way to put it. I can imagine a scenario in which there's going to be a mass apostasy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. This is what scares me. And
Right.
the late evangelical Bible scholar Michael Heiser wrote books about this, about
Mm,
trying to reach his fellow evangelicals about
mm.
the weirdness of the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and what he was trying to do is move people into a mental framework in which they could comprehend this sort of thing, so they wouldn't be shocked if this
Yeah.
stuff comes out. You know, this guy I talk about a lot, Jacques Vallée.
Oh, yeah.
He's
Yeah.
in his 80s now, lives in Silicon Valley. He's like the great eminence of the whole UFO world. He made his money as a computer scientist and a venture capitalist, but this
Yeah.
is what he spends most of his passion on, UFOs. And he wrote in this great book called from 1969 called Passage to Magonia. You can find it online. I read it for free online somewhere.
Yeah.
He wrote about how his investigations are showing that the alien encounters have a whole lot in common with things that appear in folklore throughout the world, many cultures throughout the world, of people's encounters with these beings,
Yeah. Yeah.
paranormal beings. And it was his theory back then, and I think it's his theory now, that they're just shape-shifting into a form that would make them seem potent and credible
Right.
in
Right.
the modern age, in an
Right.
age that has been shaped profoundly by the narratives of science and technology. In other words, they might have appeared as, I don't know, some sort of beast in the past.
That's
Now
right.
they're aliens because people can accept that.
What do you make of that? I find that to be pretty good.
I do
What do you
too. I
make of
do
that?
too.
Yeah.
I do too, because nobody wants to believe in fairies and
Right. That's right.
dwarves and all
That's
that
right.
stuff.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
that's folklore. But
Right.
aliens, I mean, and people are seeing them. The story. The first story I tell in my book, Living in Wonder, is
Yeah.
about ordinary Catholic guy, a lawyer, who saw a spacecraft hovering over a field when he was a teenager, didn't tell anybody. 7 years later, boom, these things start appearing to him. This is a common narrative in UFO stories
Yeah, they
that
haunt. They're haunt. These people get
exactly,
continually haunted by them and
exactly.
stalked by them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he didn't want this. He thought he was losing his mind when they
Yeah.
appeared to him. He went to the hospital. They checked him out. He was fine. They kept appearing. And when he got married, his wife saw them too. So we knew he wasn't hallucinating. And he didn't know what to do about it. They've been coming to him for like a decade or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was afraid to tell his priest. He thought he was a very conservative Catholic. He thought his
Yeah.
priest would think he was crazy. I
Right.
said, well, let me tell you, you're not crazy. That
Right.
exorcists have these stories. You should don't talk to your parish priest. Call the diocesan exorcist
Right.
and
Right.
ask
Right.
him what to do. So he did. Exorcist prayed over him. The visitation stopped. Now that's one story, but that story gets repeated a lot in a lot of different cases. I was talking to some exorcists. It might have been Father Carlos Martins, but I don't know, who said that there's so many testimonies of this happening to Christians who, when they say the name Jesus Christ or begin to pray in front of these
Right.
things, they go away. Now, if
Right.
these were beings from other planets, would that happen? I don't think so.
Well, and Pasolka lays out. I forget the gentleman's name. He's a former army guy. Grew up in a kind of gang world. Dad was
Jose,
Jose. Is that his name?
she calls him Jose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he explicitly talks about these things in exactly this register. That there is power in the name of Jesus, and that this is a spiritual phenomena. I think when people hear this is what I wanted to ask you about actually, as regards to this stuff, is when people hear you say something like it's demonic, what do you make then of the the encounter narratives that are benevolent and benign?
Mhm. The devil can appear as an angel of light, scripture tells us. I mean, this guy, Jake Barber, his story is wonderful. He said he was so filled with love and things like that when this happened, and now he has welcomed it into his life. Chris
Mhm.
Bledsoe, who believes that it's a lady, this Egyptian goddess,
Right,
he
right,
calls it
right.
wonderful.
Mhm.
And I can't doubt their subjective impression of it, but I
Sure.
also know that it's deceptive. There's a story, I think I put this in Living in Wonder. It was definitely part of my interview with Don Cipriano, this exorcist in
Uh,
Rome that I
uh,
met. That was the name he chose to go by.
yeah.
It's a practicing exorcist, Catholic priest in the Vatican. And he told a story about a very vivid dream he had one night about being in a church, and Mother Teresa was there in the church. The congregation was there. She was present for a mass, and he saw come in the back of the church the most beautiful, handsome, vigorous man. And he went down because he said that man is evil. He went down to him, and it was the devil. Now this was a dream, but it was also more than a dream. He was
Yeah.
saying, and he said that taught me that we have to be careful because the enemy, he's not going to turn up to be like an ogre, but he can turn up to be very, very, very beautiful. And funnily enough, I was down in Rome for Christmas this year, and I ended up meeting Don Cipriano for a meal.
Uh-huh.
And he told me that since Pope Francis took over the papacy, the spiritual warfare in Rome is just off the charts.
Wow.
Now, he wasn't blaming Francis
Yeah,
for
no, I
making
follow.
but he was just saying
I
that
follow.
this is something that he has observed. That you would expect that if the Catholic Church is what it says it is,
Yeah, sure.
you would expect it to be a place of battle.
It'd be, if not the ground zero, it would certainly be one of the grounds zero, for sure. Look, I was just going to say, you have long sort of speculated about, the sort of the catacon, right? The sort of the stopper, and
the thing that withholds the Antichrist.
Yeah, and you have speculated that perhaps that has been pulled now. That this is, and it certainly feels like a quickening, doesn't it?
It does. I don't know if you saw this, but Peter Thiel gave an interview, a 2-part interview to Peter Robinson at Uncommon Knowledge out in Palo Alto at the Hoover Institution. Yeah,
I know who Peter Robinson is. Yeah, I haven't seen it. Yeah, so go ahead.
Well, Thiel talks about how Carl Schmitt, the German jurist, legal scholar, who was a Nazi, right? But he's also happens to have been a great thinker. Schmitt wrote in his diary, like in 1947, that his understanding of Christian history is such that at every age of history since Christ, you can identify something or some institution that was a catacon. Now, from Scripture, the catacon is the thing that God allows to prevent the full unveiling of the Antichrist.
Right.
Schmitt said that after World War II, he said, I don't know what the catacon is. And that could mean that we're in the last days. Well, when I heard that, I was like, that's really interesting. What would the catacon be today in our time? Can you think of an obvious restrainer? It's hard, isn't it?
Well, I don't know of any restraints, Rod.
Well, no, exactly. And when I heard that, my thought was, I'm a big fan of Philip Reeve, the secular Jewish guy who said that we live in what he calls a third world. He's not talking about poverty in Africa, that sort. He said that the first world was the one of ancient pagan religion. The second world was monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the third world, the one we're in now, is a world that has ceased to refer morality to base it in anything transcendent.
Right.
And so we believe that anything goes. I mean, obviously, not everybody lives like that, but we don't.
Yeah. No, I follow you. It's not, but the myth in which we all live is denatured from its supernatural dimension.
Well, so this is where Reeve got his concept of the triumph of the therapeutic. He said that in an era when we no longer choose to live our lives by reference to some holy book or some transcendent set of morals or ethics, then the best we can do is to try to make something work and to seek a sense of peace and safety and well-being, just to deal with our anxiety over the ultimate meaninglessness of life. And Reeve said in 1966 in his book, The Triumph of the Therapeutic, he said that this mode of living has already deeply penetrated the churches. I mean, the guy was a total prophet, right? So my thought is that if the churches, if Christian faith itself, a small o Orthodox Christian faith, by which I mean a sense of Christianity, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox, that is clearly supernatural and where the ethics are based in a strong shared belief in a transcendent source of authority. If that's gone and we have replaced it with essentially a therapeutic mindset where to be a Christian is, to believe that God wants you to be happy and nice and, then there goes the catacon, and people will have been prepared to accept a false religion, the great apostasy, because the things that would have anchored them in tradition and in the
Uh-huh,
past
uh-huh.
that would have allowed them to say, hey, this isn't real, this is false, it's gone.
I mean, you know, what are the right? So along these lines, Rod, then, you know, what are the practical downstream implications of a loss of the supernatural, right? A loss of the metaphysical. You know, we have lived in this world now really for our entire lives, right? And it probably precedes us, but a widespread, deeply seated SEEDED sense that this is all there is, right? That this just, the physical is all, everything else. I mean, there must be some kind of fruit,
Yeah,
so to
yeah.
speak, of that conception.
Sure. Well, I mean, read the novels of Michel Houellebecq, and you'll see what a world without God is like. It's a world in which people are desperate to live out the therapeutic, whether it's through shopping to distract them from their anxiety, or sex, or alcoholism, drugs,
Yeah, it's
whatever.
so true.
It's avoiding the essential meaninglessness of life. Freddie DeBoer, the left wing
Yeah.
essayist,
Oh
who's
yeah, I read
really
him. I
good.
read him. Yeah.
Yeah, Freddie talked about the other day. I mean, he's a Marxist. I assume
Yeah.
he has no religious belief, but he talked about this thing that's come out that ought to have been national news, but isn't, about this transgender murder cult that seems to have just emerged. Did you follow that news?
I do. Yeah, I do follow him.
Okay,
Rod, come on.
so
I follow all the weird things too, man. Come on. I'm with you. I'm
of
with you.
course,
I'm
that's
with
why
you.
we're friends, man.
That's
But
right.
for those who don't know, there was around the New Year, I think it was, or shortly after, a U.S. Border Patrol agent was shot and killed when they stopped two young people coming across the Canadian border. And in the altercation, one of the two civilians was shot and killed too. They're trans people, right? Young trans people from the
Mhm.
San Francisco Bay Area who are part of a cult called the Zizians.
Is Zizian, Zizian, Zizian.
Zizians. I forget where that comes from. But
That's it.
anyway, it's Andy No online
Yeah.
has reported a lot of this. And once again, Kale, this is why Twitter matters.
Yeah. That's
Andy
right.
No has reported, and some local media, that this cult might be responsible for as many as 8 murders.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
I bring that up because Freddie DeBoer writes about how this is going to become the new normal. And DeBoer comes at it as a cultural critic. He said that in an era when nobody has any meaning,
Yeah.
any sense of meaning or purpose, people can't live like that. And
Well,
that
yeah.
there will be
Yeah.
people who will give themselves over to violence just so they can feel
Feel
something.
something. That's right. I think about this, Rod. I teach, right? And you know, I've certainly witnessed in the past, whatever. I've been in the classroom for more than 20 years, almost 20 here, even, but I've been over 20 years. And one of the things that I've noticed in that time is the crushing, grinding effects of anxiety on a certain number of kids. And I would argue that certain number of kids may have been one or two a year to, a handful to a dozen to, and I wonder if there are certain people who can live with a heck of a lot of meaninglessness. A lot of people can live with just sort of like going about their business, doing their thing, punching the time clock, making the donuts, right? Just grinding life out, watching some football games, going out for the occasional hamburger. They can kind of do this thing. But there's a number of kids that simply can't deal with a reality that has no meaning. And what frustrates me for these kids is I very much feel that the world, the adult world has over time systematically uprooted any structures with which a kid could plug him or herself into to feel that sense of meaning, to have that experience of meaning. And we've replaced it with nothing but, in my context, we've just replaced it with success. We've replaced it with, get into the right college and get into the right pipeline, get into the right internships and get into the right position, right? And there seem to be a certain amount of kids who can do that. And maybe they blow off steam by getting drunk or high, on the weekends, but they can kind of keep it together. But there's a growing, again, I would say, a handful, and it kind of keeps getting that's just not enough. And I wonder if on some level, those aren't sort of versions of a canary in a coal mine, that the deep multi-generational felt meaninglessness of it all is catching up to us.
Yeah, I think it has to be. You and I both grew up in South Louisiana, and I mean, your family was religiously observant. Mine really wasn't, but we were thoroughly cultural Christians.
Right.
We didn't have to go to church because God was
That's it.
And I used to make fun of my parents for that. And I went through a period I was mad at them right after I became a Christian in my 20s. Like, you deprived me of something real. But as I get older and have seen what it means to grow up outside of cultural Christianity, I'm glad that I had, as a psychological aid, if nothing else, I'm glad I had what I did, because even though we weren't churchgoers and I had almost no knowledge of Christianity beyond the surface, there was still the psychological, there was a narrative that gave a sense of solidity to the world. I didn't worry as a kid, does God exist, does he not, or what he wanted me to do. And you didn't, in those days, it's really hard, I think, for kids growing up today to know this, but in those days, atheist. I remember as a kid in the 70s reading about Madeline Murray O'Hare.
I remember that too. Yeah, I remember that.
She was the head of American Atheists. She was a crazy person. I remember, oh my God, can you believe this person exists? And of course, we've come a long way from Madeline Murray O'Hare. And I think, though, that you're onto something, that we have systematically removed any sense of a structure outside of the individual perceiving and desiring, any sense of that there's anything beyond ourselves. People can't live with that. Right. I couldn't live with that.
Well, a certain amount of people can, though. Like this is what I'm struck with. And I think you're right, Rod. But a certain amount of people they can kind of just do the thing. They can like show up and do the thing. And as I think of my own kind of odyssey, in many respects, I left home begrudgingly. I didn't want to leave Louisiana. But I know I had this sort of nagging sense that I had to, and I'm still not sure what it has all meant in the sort of the wanderings of my life, even though I've been where I am for almost 18 years. But my point is that I felt that ambient cultural Christianity as essentially problematic back in the early 90s when I was graduating high school. Okay. I felt I felt something like I knew that I needed. I always knew that I needed to do something. I was never a kid who would answer a question, well, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer so I can make as much money as possible. Like for whatever reason. And I had friends who talked like that and they were fine. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a businessman. I'm going to make and that was fine. I just knew that was utterly meaningless to me. I knew, and so I cast about in my mid-teen years about what that meant. And, at the time I thought that meant being a hippie, right? Or in that time I thought that meant being a monk. At times I thought that meant being, a teacher. At times I thought that meant, I had all these sort of what I would call sort of like meaning first vocations. Or, something
you
like
were
that.
Seeking not a job, but a vocation, not a career, but a vocation.
Right. Because I understood, at least on this sort of gut visceral level, that vocation was where it was at. now in part you could argue I had that sense because of my parents and all of that, and that's probably true, right? But I knew that a life not oriented to meaning was not a life worth living. Again, I wouldn't have been able to put those words on
Sure,
it,
sure.
um, and that's been a little bit of an adventure, to put it mildly, because one must pay the bills after all. But my point, I guess, here is that what I'm seeing in my own students is that they don't even have those kind of cartoon visions of a vocation that I had, right? I could sort of pretend that, I could be a hippie, or I could be a religious, or I could be, they don't even have those. For them, it's like either I get into the most prestigious college I can possibly get into, and I put myself, in a position, to succeed in whatever industry I am going to pursue, or it's like, or there's nothing. And then this second move, like, and even if I get that, it probably doesn't mean anything either. And they don't have this other thing to fall back on.
Boy, yeah, I'll get real personal here. I was thinking about this not long ago.
Mm,
All the thing over the last 20 years or so, all of the things that gave me a sense of meaning and structure, that worldly things have fallen away from me.
right,
You know
right,
my story about losing my Catholic faith. Around the same time, I lost faith in political conservatism.
yeah,
Because of the Iraq War and then the
yeah,
Wall Street crash. Um, I ended up moving back to Louisiana, discovering how my family wouldn't accept me and my wife and kids back, and
right,
so I lost that because it was such a shock. And then I lost my marriage.
right, right,
The only thing that has been a thread through there is faith in Jesus Christ, because
right,
after I lost my Catholicism, I became Eastern Orthodox, and I made a really important decision when I did that, when I became Orthodox, never to trust a religious institution, in an ordinary way.
yeah,
And
yeah. Of
that
course,
matters
I get it,
because
I
I
get it, I
have a
get it.
have a good friend who's Orthodox, who's being royally screwed by an Orthodox institution now, and it
Yeah,
is horrible.
yeah,
And it was just a reminder to me, I made the right call to focus on Christ, my prayers, the sacraments, and so on. And it's any having lost almost all of those things, just one of them would have been a blow. I've lost them all.
yeah,
And yet I sit here talking to you, battered and bruised in a
yeah,
way,
yeah,
but still
yeah,
basically whole because of Christ.
yeah,
And if I had not had him, if I'd been like one of these kids, because this is the Dante story, right?
yeah,
This
yeah.
is the actual poet Dante. He was
Right,
on top of,
because in the end, everything will be taken away from you,
yeah,
right?
they took
Yeah, yeah,
everything away from him. In real life, he was, listeners may not know, he was not only a successful poet, but he was also in the senior level of government in
yeah,
Florence. Got on the wrong side of politics. The Pope betrayed him, led him
yeah,
out of the city for the coup, and he was exiled. Never saw his city again. Cut off from his family. And he had to try to make sense of this. And this is where we get the Divine Comedy, the Commedia. It was the poet's attempt to make sense of what had happened to him and learn where he had gone wrong and how he could repair his life and find God again. And I think that, more and more people should be reading Dante,
yeah,
because he knows what it's like to have all the sources of meaning taken from you. I mean, and he was a faithful Catholic. He hated the Pope, Boniface
right,
VIII. The Pope was like his Darth Vader figure,
yeah,
but it didn't get in the way of his belief in Christ as a
yeah.
Catholic, right?
Right, 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 right.
Anyway, I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole here,
Well,
but I'm,
I just think that, what I'm sensing you saying, and I'm feeling it myself, is that, that the default, the vital default of our imaginal space vis-a-vis religion provides us with a kind of way to make sense out of the onslaught of nihilistic bomb after nihilistic bomb, right? and and you know, we are fortunate, we are blessed, right, with our faith. And I worry, you know, again, I'm speaking here as a teacher, I worry for my students who do not have that, you know, and
Yeah,
you know, and I work with them, I witness to them in my way, but I worry, you know, that they've got nothing. And so therefore, to sort of connect this to the sort of the weird UAP stuff and alien disclosure stuff and the emergence of this new religious stuff, these folks are primed for a big fat lie,
yep,
you
yeah,
know, that, you know, and you know, what is going to sound better in the sea and the tempest of chaos, you know, the chaotic tempest, than this sort of the teachings of a new religion, you know, that will
yeah.
um, say you're just fine the way you are, Rod. You know, those kinds of things that are really, it's like it's smooth, it feels good, right? You know,
Sure, it's therapeutic.
yeah, right, right,
I mean,
right.
sorry, this guy's calling me. Let me get rid of that app.
Well, Rod,
Um,
you know, we've been on here. I just want to, I'll, you know me, we could go full Joe Rogan, but I know it's getting late there for you in Budapest. But what are you working on? Just out of curiosity, what are you seeing? Are you
get,
focused on Europe? Are you focused on what are you doing?
well, I've really got to get my head in the game about the release of the Live Not by Lies
Yeah,
documentary.
yeah,
It's really great, man. I went with them to film some of this. We interviewed a lot of the people I talked to in the book, the
yeah.
Christians
So
who
good.
stayed behind. And
Yeah.
by the end of this movie, I watched it on Sunday, the last episode. I sobbed like a baby. And
Oh
I knew
wow,
all this material, but it was so
wow.
well presented. This Camilla Bendova,
Yeah,
she's
yeah.
probably the one of my great heroes in life. She's an old woman now. She and her late husband Václav raised 6 kids under communism. He was in prison, and Tolkien was a big deal for them.
Yeah.
And she said, they all read Tolkien, all the dissidents back in the day. And she said that, and she's on camera saying this,
Yeah.
sweet old lady. And she said, there's a part in The Lord of the Rings where one of the hobbits says, "Do you think they'll sing songs about us one day?"
Mm,
She said,
yeah. Ah,
we used to say that about ourselves, meaning when they were fighting communism. Will they sing songs about us one day?
yeah.
Dude, I lost it
Yeah, that's
because
beautiful. Wow.
I not only was did I lose it at the sentiment, but I thought about how we have forgot these people if
Yeah.
we ever knew them at all
Right,
in
right,
America.
right.
It's like communism's over, boom, push them out of the way. But they saw, they're witnesses, they remembered. And this movie is going to make sure, in some sense, that they haven't been forgotten. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm also going, gosh, is it next week, to ARC, the big
Oh
Jordan
yeah,
Peterson event. They're
yeah.
doing a second one in London. Going to be meeting Bishop Barron, which I've
Oh,
always wanted to do.
yeah, that's great. That's great. Is he gonna interview
Yeah.
you or what?
No, no, no. We just all
Okay.
there on. I'm on a panel. David
Sure.
Brooks is doing it with Sir Neil Ferguson and
Oh yeah.
somebody else. So I get
Very
like 3 minutes, my big
yeah,
time
yeah, yeah.
in the sun. But anyway, no, it's always fun to go to ARC because you see everybody that you read online all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Then going up to Cambridge to visit my friends James and Helen Orr. I
Oh,
got to
so
tell
cool.
you, man, you know who James is, but
I do, yeah.
almost anything interesting and good that's happening in the UK intellectual conservative space and among Christians, it's centered around James. He's a
Yeah.
professor there at Cambridge, teaches philosophy and theology, and just a very serious Christian, incredibly smart, very well spoken. And I mean, he's emerging as a really pivotal figure in UK conservatism at a time when they need somebody like that. And
Yeah.
I love going up to visit them and they have a little compound north of Cambridge on the River Cam. They rent cottages there to Christian undergraduates and graduate students at Cambridge. And it's just, they're good people. And I need that sort of refreshment.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to make a pilgrimage there at some point.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk about it. It sounds wonderful. I need to go pay my respects and feel it out for myself. So well, great. Look, Rod, look, I thank you, man. It's as every time we do one of these reunion shows, I forget, man, I really love doing this with Rod. It's a shame we can't do it more, but thank you so much for coming on, audience. Rod's stuff is in all of his contact stuff is in the bottom in the description. You know where to see him. No one works harder for his Substack than Rod Dreher. He gives it out to you 5
Every
days a
day,
week.
man.
He's amazing. And how you can crank that stuff out, it's beyond me. I have ideas, but your ability to get them and spit them and get them out there, so amazing. Thank you so much, Rod, for what you do for your friendship. And I am really looking forward to this movie. So until then, brother, we will talk again. Cheers.
We will. And Cale,
happy
birthday.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Pre-birthday.
Yeah.
You
it's
too, brother.
coming, though.
You too, brother. God bless, man.
It's coming. All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.